The coach rolled in on a breath of bitter wind, a rattling ghost on the frozen ground. Dry Hollow didn't stir for the likes of it. They'd seen it all before. But today the air held a new kind of chill, a promise of trouble, wrapped in fine eastern cloth. Down stepped Maria, her name a whispered prayer on the prairie wind. She came from a world of whispered gossip and quiet desperation, a world of too tight bodices and hopes pinned on a stranger's promise. Her dress a shade of bruised blue strained across her chest, and hips like a second skin, a testament to a body too real for a world that preferred its women modest and small. She saw him first, Esteban the banker's son, a man polished but weak with eyes that measured her like a piece of livestock. He saw the frayed hem, the torn sleeve, the rich curve of her body that defied the straight lines of his expectations. "You're not what I was expecting," he stammered, his gaze lingering on her chest like a man caught stealing. Maria, her hands clasped, stood her ground. Her face a mask of forced calm betrayed nothing. Not the shaking in her fingers, not the ache in her chest that had nothing to do with the cold. She'd come all this way for this moment of public shame, a rejection whispered in the open air for all to hear. Esteban, a man with a spine of jelly-turned tail, following his father's back like a whipped dog. They left her there, a lone figure of defiance against the backdrop of a town that fed on whispers and weakness. She didn't cry. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction. Instead, she sat on the depot platform, her carpet bag clutched, close, a fortress of quiet dignity. Across the street, Jack watched it all. He was a man of dust and shadow, a heavy canvas duster, his only armor against a world he'd long since given up on. He came to town for feed, but found something else entirely. He saw not the humiliation, but the resilience. He saw the set of her jaw, the straight line of her back, the way she refused to break. He knew that look, the quiet, gnawing shame of someone who had lost everything but their pride. It was a look he wore himself, a limp from an old war wound, a scar from a life lived too long alone. He'd lost a leg, a brother, a wife, and with them his desire for company. He was enough. He was fine. But as he watched her, something in that old cold heart began to thaw. He crossed the street. His boots, heavy and deliberate, made no sound on the packed dirt. He stopped before her, a silhouette against the Sunday. He didn't offer a hand or a smile, just a question in the silence. When she finally looked up, her eyes were tired but steady. He didn't leer, didn't measure. His pale gray-blue eyes saw only her, a woman in need of a place to land. He gestured to his wagon, a single word hanging between them. West. It was a word that held a world of possibility and a dangerous, unspoken promise. With nothing left to lose, she rose. She climbed into his wagon, the rough boards creaking under her weight, a sound like a new chapter beginning. They left Dry Hollow, behind two strangers bound by a shared language of silence and sorrow, headed toward a horizon that held nothing and everything. The wagon pushed deeper into the land, away from the prying eyes of town, and into a world of endless pine and unforgiving cold. The wind howled down from the mountains, a long dry breath that cut through Maria's borrowed coat. It was Jack's coat, heavy with the scent of pine smoke, worn leather, and something else, something warm and solid that felt like a shield. The cabin appeared on the rise, a lone outpost against the vast, indifferent sky. Smoke curled from its chimney, a quiet beacon in the fading light. Inside the cabin was a place of stark simplicity. A stove, a cot, a table, no frills, no fuss, just the bones of a life lived alone. The air was warm, smelling of banked fire and old wood. He didn't ask her name, and she didn't offer it. He simply moved, a man of quiet purpose, stoking the fire, reaching for a pot. She didn't hesitate when he handed her a knife. They worked side by side in the new silence, a rhythm building between them. The beans and potatoes simmered, a simple meal that tasted of safety and the first stirrings of hope. Her hands, soft and unused to work, blistered, but she didn't complain. He gave her a rag without a word, a gesture that spoke volumes. Later, as they ate, the silence settled into something comfortable. He was a man of few words, but his stillness held a kind of strength. She asked him if he lived there alone. Yeah, he said. He didn't ask her why she came, but his answer to her was a quiet challenge. You need a place, a simple truth that echoed in the lonely space between them. She finally offered her name, Maria. He gave his back, Jack. The names were like a handshake in the dark, a small step toward understanding. That night, she laid her bedding closer to the stove. Not much, just enough. He sat in his chair, a torn dime novel in his hands, but his eyes were on her. She undid the pins in her hair, letting the thick waves fall around her shoulders. She was still a stranger, still a woman who had nowhere to go, but in this quiet cabin, in the presence of this silent man, she wasn't afraid. He was a man used to pain, a man who carried his wounds like a second skin. She recognized it because she carried her own. He saw her flinch at a sound outside, a reflex of a soul still on edge. He rose, added another log to the fire, and looked at her. "You warm enough?" he asked. It was more than a question. It was the first full sentence he'd offered, an olive branch of unspoken care. She nodded, her heart, a fragile thing that ached with the kindness she hadn't expected. She pulled the blanket tighter, the scent of him, and the smell of pine a comfort in the dark. The fire popped and crackled, a small, defiant light against the vast, empty world outside. The first frostbitten days of their new life were built on the rhythm of work and silence. The snow crunched under their boots as they moved between the cabin and the barn, a silent ballet of shared labor. He gave her canvas trousers and a flannel shirt, clothes that were too big but allowed her to move. Her hands, once soft and useless, grew calloused. He watched her. Not her figure this time, though he noticed the way her hips filled out the too large pants. He watched her work, the quiet determination in her movements. She didn't complain, didn't play helpless. When her hands blistered, she bandaged them herself and kept on. He saw her strength. One midday they rested on a rock, sharing bread and jerky. The silence wasn't a wall anymore, but a space filled with unspoken questions. She saw the pain in his walk, the slight favor of his injured leg. He saw the weariness in her eyes. It was she who broke the quiet, a question hanging in the cold air. "You were married before?" A simple truth she'd intuited. "Yeah," he answered, his gaze on the distance. "She died here. Childbirth." Maria's heart ached for the ghost he lived with. "I'm sorry," she whispered. The weight of his loss settled between them. She understood. He lived with a ghost. She lived with a rejection that had felt like death. Later, inside, the old shirt she wore shifted as she knelt by the fire. The thin fabric slipped, revealing the smooth curve of her shoulder, a glimpse of the rich skin beneath. She straightened, embarrassed, but he had already seen. He turned away, his jaw tightening. It was a moment of charged silence, a physical reminder of the hunger that lay just beneath the surface of their quiet routine. That night, she moved her bedding even closer to the fire. He didn't stop her. He sat in his chair, mending a boot, the air between them, thick with a new kind of tension. "Why'd you help me?" she asked, her voice a fragile thing in the quiet. He didn't answer right away. "Didn't seem right," he finally said. "Leaving you there." It was a simple answer, a truth that held a profound weight. He looked at her, and she laid her hand on his arm, a gentle, trusting touch. "Thank you," she said, "for seeing me." And in that touch, in that word, something shifted. He hadn't just helped her. He had seen her worth when no one else had. The slow thaw brought with it a change in the air, a different kind of tension. The mud was thick, the sky a hopeful gray. Maria now moved through the cabin with a sense of purpose. She wore his clothes like they were her own, her body, a quiet defiance of the world that had called her too much. He watched her no longer with curiosity, but with a lingering, unspoken hunger. His hand would graze hers, a quiet touch on her back. One afternoon, he sat on the porch, his gaze fixed on her as she worked. He called out, "You all right?" His voice, though rough, held a gentle current. She smiled, a soft, private smile that had no place in the world of Dry Hollow. That night, they were closer than ever. She stood at the stove, her hip brushing against his. He didn't move away. After supper, she brushed her hair by the fire, the light flickering against her skin. He nursed his coffee, but his eyes were on her. The silence, so long their shield, was now a challenge. He crossed the room, his movements slow, deliberate. He knelt beside her, a man of scars and ghosts, offering himself. She reached for his hand, her fingers interlacing with his calloused ones. "You've been kind to me," she whispered. "But I'm not broken. I never thought you were," he said. His thumb moved slowly over her skin, a quiet promise. She leaned in her head against his chest. He didn't pull her closer, just let her be. But his presence was a warmth, a shelter. She lifted her face to his, her breath, a question in the flickering light. Their lips met a gentle press, brief but held. He didn't move away. She looked at him again. "You don't have to stay alone anymore," she whispered. He touched her face, brushing a stray curl from her eye. "I know," he said, and in that simple admission, everything changed. They lay tangled in the blanket, the firelight casting long shadows on the walls. She traced the scar on his side, a silent question. "What are we, Jack?" she whispered. He didn't open his eyes, just squeezed her hand. "Real," he said. It was more than a word. It was a vow. But the fragile peace was shattered by the sound of hooves. A single rider, a town deputy, rode hard up to the cabin. The banker's son, Emery, had come back, a fragile man looking for a fight he couldn't win. He came with a claim, a demand for what was his. He saw Maria, her hair loose, her hands in the dirt, and a smug look twisted on his face. "You filled out," he sneered, a cruel jab at the very thing he'd rejected. Jack stepped forward, his body a solid wall of quiet menace. "She's not yours," he said, his voice flat and hard as stone. Maria stepped onto the porch. Her hands were tight, her chin high. She confronted Emery, the man who had humiliated her. "You paid for a letter, not a life," she said, her voice clear and strong. "You said I was too much. Now you want to claim me because someone else saw my worth." The shame on Emery's face was a bitter victory. He spat on the ground and rode away, a bitter, defeated figure. Jack turned to Maria. "He never saw you," he said. She looked at him, her eyes filled with the truth she had just discovered. "And you did," she said. He reached out and touched her waist, a claiming gesture, a silent vow. "I saw you the second you sat on that platform and didn't cry." That night she took off her dress in front of him for the first time, not in shame but in trust. She was no longer a cast-off. She was a woman who was chosen, and Jack, for all his quiet, had chosen her. The valley softened, the land coming alive with a new kind of song. Birds returned, the creek ran fast, and the quiet rhythm of their days deepened. Maria cooked without asking, planted seeds in straight, neat lines, and wore her mended blue dress with a quiet pride. Her body, once a source of shame, was a celebration. She no longer flinched at the wind or the shadows. She was home. Jack watched her, the scowl that had become a part of his face now softened into something like peace. One morning, he told her he was going to town. "I'll be back," he said, and for the first time she believed him without question. He returned with two things, a new kettle and a small cloth-wrapped box. He handed it to her, the weight of the moment heavy between them. Inside, a simple silver ring. He didn't get on one knee, didn't offer flowery words. He just said, "You've been calling this home. I want you to call it yours." She slid the ring on her finger, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "It already is," she whispered. Later by the fire, he asked her a question that held a lifetime of meaning. "Do you want to get married proper?" she said. She didn't need paper, but she needed to hear him say the words. "That I'm yours," she said. He looked down at her, his voice rough with emotion. "You are, from the first day I saw you on that platform." A few weeks later, her body gave her a sign. The ache, the familiar miss of a cycle, a new life growing inside her. She told him, her voice a small, hopeful thing. He didn't panic. He just pulled her close, pressed a kiss to her temple, and said, "Then we'll make room for more." The cabin, once a lonely outpost, was now a home for a family. Her apron now hung beside his two sets of boots, sat side by the fire, and in the evening 2 figures stood on the porch, their arms resting together on the rail. They never talked about the past again. The whispers of Dry Hollow, the shame of that day, had been replaced by the quiet truth of their love. Forever wasn't spoken, it was lived. Every morning, every shared chore, every look across the table. Maria was finally home, chosen for who she was, loved without condition, and for the first time in her life she was enough.